Well, good morning. If Kate Simmons is any more successful, our event will be all sponsor intros and then 5 minutes for the talk.
Absolutely.
So congratulations to Kate and thank you to all of our sponsors and welcome. It's back to school at Like a Boss. How many people liked Glenn's first day of school photo on Facebook?
Oh,
that was a big, right?
My mother's out there somewhere.
So we are delighted to have President Glenn Cummings with us this morning. And as we always do, we're going to start and learn about Glenn's early days and where he grew up. So let's start right there, Glenn.
Well, okay, so
Yeah.
My mother is out in the audience, so maybe
Welcome,
she can talk
Mrs.
about
Cummings.
it. There she is. Thank you. My wife often jokes that there was a court order for me to marry out of state because we were so inbred. We're about 300 years, I think, on Georgetown Island in Maine, just outside of Bath, where I grew up. I'm a Morse High School graduate and multi-generation. My mother is a Morse High School graduate, and my grandmother and grandfather and others are all Morse High School graduates. So we've been building ships and sanding ships for many, many generations. I like to say that we're one of the few families in America that have stayed in the same geographic spot for 300 years and the same low socioeconomic status for 300 years. Most Americans have not done that. So
Well, congratulations on that.
We're keeping that tradition. I went into education just to maintain that.
You got to keep up the family tradition. So your first job that you had that you got paid for, I guess.
That I got paid for it. Well, I was a lifeguard at Reed State Park at Georgetown, and so
anyone here that you
nobody's
saved?
been saved. I don't think. Trust me, I was a little too skinny. Most people said maybe we'll get the other guys to help out. And then I went off to school and to college, and I came back after at about 23, and I started teaching high school at Gorham High School, which I enjoyed. And I did that for 13 years. I taught economics and history.
Oh wow! So what, aside from your grandmother, well, she was a big inspiration, of course, for you to go into teaching. But what prompted you to go into teaching?
Well, just to stay on my grandmother for just a minute. I mean, it was interesting. It feels like a full loop in my life to be at USM. My grandmother was the first in our family to get a college degree. She went to what was then called the Gorham Normal School, which was the very early version of USM. In 1927, she graduated, and she became a teacher. And she would tell stories about being being a teacher. She went back to Bath, Maine, where she was teaching a second grade, and she would just tell these stories about teaching. Just one that I could just quickly share that really always intrigued me is that somehow a nickel had been stolen. Some kid in the class had stolen a nickel. So she creatively, at a very young age, said, I want everybody to put their head down on the table, on their desk, and I want you each to clench your fist, and when I tap your fist, if you have the nickel, open up your hand and drop it in. And she said, I went around, and I kind of knew who it might have been that stole the nickel, and she said, sure enough, when I tapped his hand, the nickel fell back into mine. We never talked about it, and it worked. I was like, that is so cool.
Yeah,
I want to be a teacher. That's fantastic. The other, I remember, I got a pretty good public education at Morse High School, and I remember, I was just thinking the other day when I was driving into work that, I don't know if people started about 2 weeks ago, but there was sort of a thin mist, and there was this sort of, the sun was like a perfect wafer in the sky, and I remember the opening line to Red Badge of Courage where it says the sun was pasted in the sky like a wafer. And I remember having to read this out loud in Mrs. Perry's class in English. And so we were reading the first paragraph, and I read that first sentence, and she said, stop. And I'm thinking, it seems like a basic sentence. And she said, what did you just read? And I said, I don't really know. And she said, well, do you have a wafer? Do you eat wafers at all, or wafers or whatever? And I had no idea. And some kids said, Necco wafers. And she said, well, that's not what I'm thinking. Yeah. And somebody finally raised their hand and said, communion. And she's like, so do you think this is an accident that Stephen Crane wrote that there was a wafer pasted in the sky. And it was the first time that I thought, oh, this isn't just like the story is the story. There are multiple stories layered in here. And I thought, wow, thank you for telling me that. You know, and I just, you know, from that, it created a whole new level of meaning for me. And I just loved history and literature and ultimately policy. And so that's kind of what inspired me.
Well, it's pretty amazing that to this day, when you see the sun in the sky like that, you think about Mrs. Perry.
I do think about Mrs. Perry, yes.
So, is she here today?
Yeah, no.
No. That is a wonderful, wonderful story. So you were teaching at Gorham High School, and then you went into politics. So
Yeah, I did.
How did that work?
How'd that work? How'd that work for you? I'm recovering from that.
Yeah.
You know, I'm recovering. Thank you to Pat and to Ed for their kind words this morning. And you know, it's funny. I had some great experiences. You know, Kate Simmons was just reminding me that. So my thing was to try to knock on every door in my district every time I ran for election. And it didn't matter whether they were in the same party as I was or not in the same party, but to knock on every door, leave some literature. And Kate was reminding me of the story where it was my second time I was running, and I was having a pretty good day, and I was going down, I think it was Fessenden Street or one of Pitt Street, and I was feeling pretty good, and a couple of people were like, hey, we really like what you're doing up there, it feels fantastic, and my, you know, my sense of myself was getting pretty confident, and the last house on the street, there was just this open porch, and it looked exceptionally clean, but I didn't catch on that until I was literally walking across the entire porch that it had just been painted. And I got almost to the door and I realized I just stuck, you know, on all those 4 steps and across this little porch. And of course, the moment I was thinking,
run.
No. I was thinking, do I have any of my opponent's literature?
Even better.
Even better, right?
Yeah.
So, if you're going to make a mistake, make it on their account. No,
right.
I did. So,
no, never.
But all of a sudden, behind the screen, this woman came out, and she goes, oh my, get off my porch, get off of me. She started screaming. I was like, I'm really sorry you didn't put up any sign or anything, and I'm really sorry. And she got really upset. And so I kind of walked to the side of the porch and got off the porch, and I said, look, I'll repaint. No, go away. Just go away. I don't want you. I don't want your material. I said, oh, okay. Well, I said, look, I'm really sorry. Whatever. I said, I've painted porches before. I just repaint this. It won't take that long. And she's like, no. And then all of a sudden, the screen door just opens, and out comes this paint can with a paintbrush on it. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. So she stepped by. I never even actually saw her face. I'm painting the thing, and she's talking to me about health care and about everything. I finally finished. I gave it back to her, and I said, so can I count on your vote? And she said, I'll think about it. So good experience.
Yeah.
I actually am really blessed. I mean, there are times when, you know, somebody will say, oh, he's a politician, and it doesn't feel good, to be honest. I don't like it. I like to be considered more of an educator, and I also think that there's a negative part of politician, but I'm actually really proud of public service. I learned a lot of skills. I met great people. I had to learn a lot of things about, you know, how the nature of conflict can work and not work, and what seems to work. So I actually say that being in the legislature was great preparation for working, say, with faculty. It's you know, it was
right.
actually it was
right.
good
No,
stuff.
there certainly are good lessons from that. So President Obama, before he was president, called you one day. So what was that phone call like?
That was desperation on his part, by the
No.
way. I just want you to know. So I was finishing up as Speaker of the House, and as you know, there was a primary in the Democratic primary, and so Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were running against each other in 2007. And virtually every major Democrat was with Hillary. So Governor Baldacci had worked with them, worked with the Clintons in Washington. Tom Allen, at the time was our congressperson, had done a Rhodes Scholarship with Bill Clinton. Both Hannah and Shelley Pingree were strongly wanted a woman president. So there was very little support at that time, at least in the leadership for President Obama and what would become President Obama. And so I got this call and basically said, you know, I could really use a friend up in Maine. And I said, well, I just read your book, Dreams of My Father, and I really was moved by it.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I like what you stand for, and yeah, I'll support you. And I get off the phone, and my chief of staff says, what were you thinking? The guy's a nice guy, but he's polling 20 points behind Hillary Clinton, and the Clintons never forget.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I didn't think through that really. But
I love his book, though. Boy, did I love his book. Yeah.
I like his book.
Yeah.
I said, look, I'm going to go through with it. I think he's a good guy, and I'm leaving politics anyway. I'm term limited out in a couple of years, and I'm going to just stick with it. And sure enough, I introduced him. We were expecting maybe a crowd of 1,200 people, and 3,600 people showed up, and it was kind of crazy. And I was like, there's some energy here that's bigger than what I had anticipated. And then, of course, I introduced him a couple times here. By the time he came back to Bangor, it was almost 12,000 people. And then he won the caucus the next day. And then afterwards, to his credit, by that time he didn't call me personally, but after the election, he had some of his team call and say, look, the president thinks that you were helpful, and if you'd like to be considered for a position, here's how to do this and whatever. And so eventually they brought me down as what we call a deputy secretary in the Department of Education.
And how many years were you there?
I was just there 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal, though, because you were leaving Maine, right? I mean, the family hadn't left for 300
I know,
years.
no kidding. Yeah, exactly. It was
So what is
a little uncomfortable, actually.
Yeah. What are some of the lessons that you learned in Washington that you brought back with you?
Well, one of the things that I can bring back to us as Mainers is that, sometimes we get frustrated with the legislature and whatever, but I can say, relative to Congress, seriously, it is amazing what happens, at least in most sessions. This last session was a little rough, but in most sessions in the Maine legislature, you get a 2/3 vote on a budget. 80+% of those bills are actually agreed on by both parties, and so I have a huge amount of respect for the process, and they don't run into debt. I mean, as much as we complain about our budget in the state of Maine, the budget is always balanced, and it has to be rebalanced constantly. So there are some things that I'm very proud of in Maine. And Washington doesn't play by those same rules. When I got to the department that I was in charge of was at that time called the Office of Vocational and Adult Education. And so the word vocational had sort of gone out of K-12 education back in the 70s. Mm-hmm. So I recommended that we change it to career technical and adult ed. And I'm not exaggerating, I was there for 2 years, couldn't get the thing through Congress, and I got a call 2 years after I had left from my former chief of staff saying, Glenn, great news.
We did it.
They passed it, and they changed the name. So 4 years it took to actually pass the name change. So there were a lot of things that were, I think, not as efficient, not as collaborative as I found in the Maine legislature. On the other hand, it was just exciting to be part of the Obama administration. There's a lot of idealism, sense of things, trying to really uptick our percentage of Americans at college degrees. We increased Pell Grants significantly. We kind of restructured some things around student loans and student debt that I think have not done as much as we want, but it definitely had an impact. So it was an exciting time for me, and it was an honor for me to be part of it.
Most certainly. So then you're back in Maine, and your path to USM, because you walked into USM at a really dark period in their history.
Yeah.
So tell us about that transition.
Yeah, so USM, I think many of you know that for about a decade, USM had been struggling with a decrease in student enrollment. There are probably a couple factors for that. One is in general, Maine was losing 18-year-olds, and secondly, the rise of the community college, which I think is a fantastic thing for Maine. In fact, when I was in the legislature, I sponsored the legislation in 2002 to bring the Maine Community College from the technical college into the community college system it is today, which I think is very positive. As a result, however, we had gone from almost 11,000 students down to 8,000 students. So for those of you who are in business, you can imagine losing, 20-25% of your customer base and not really making deep financial adjustments. And what could have perhaps been done earlier and more promptly turned into a crisis. And so to his credit, David Flanagan came in for a year, made some tough choices, and didn't necessarily always make perfect choices. I think he'd say that. But he had to get us back to something close to a balanced budget. So he took a $16 million deficit, brought it to a $4 million deficit when I came in. I will report on July 1st, which makes me almost want to cry, is that we now have a $10 million surplus after 3 years.
Whoa.
So it's really happy.
So you're going to, next July, you're going to report on that. Is that what you said?
No, this last July.
Oh, last
Yeah,
July.
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, this July is we
I was
hit
getting
the,
my months
we hit the
confused.
$10 million mark, which was great for us, and we're very proud of that. I just want to make a shout out to the team. As you know, in any organization, it really is about the incredible team. We have a fantastic set of faculty. I'm very proud of them, and the work that they do with the community is amazing, and the work they do in the classroom is even more amazing. And I will also say that the 11 members of our team right now in the leadership, I have so much respect for all of them. Many of them are here today.
So yeah, let's talk about your team, because when you walked in, I think most of the senior team had actually left, and you rebuilt the team. So what were the skills or the attributes that you were looking for the people that surround you, and what are some of those roles as well? Yeah,
so you can imagine what the roles are. So you have to have somebody who's the head of HR, you have to have somebody who's the head of enrollment, you have to have people who are head of your legal team and the public relations team. Many of that would be similar to a business in many cases. You have to have a dean of students. Those kind of things are very important about their attitude, and that was a tough, my first 60 days, 90 days were very tough for me personally. I made a decision to let go of 9 of the 11 members of the cabinet. So, and I found myself being incredibly tired, and I realized, I'm doing all of those jobs, right? So be careful if you do that. You might want to space that out a little bit more. And some of those conversations were really difficult. It's not, I'm not the kind of guy that likes to let people go, but I think that I was looking for people who could really see the future of the university, see the potential of the university, and a lot of people were just so tired, I mean, from the exhaustion of difficult budgets and difficult morale and high political tension, that they didn't have that energy that they needed, unfortunately, to move into that next level. So I was looking for people who I knew exemplified that. I made a decision, for example, with our provost, who's here today, Janine Uzi, thank you for being here. Interesting enough, she was one of the faculty members that, if it's okay to say this, it's public knowledge, I suppose, that she was laid off. She ran the classics department. The classics department didn't have as many students as they might normally have, and I made somewhat of a controversial decision, but based on 2 or 3 things that I really liked about what she had. Students loved her, high academic, great reputation as a teacher, great researcher, and always put students first, and had really positive energy and devoted to our cause of really focusing on students as the future of the university. And so, when I went to the Board of Trustees and say, I'm taking one of the people that Dave Flanagan just fired and I'm making her the provost, the Board of Trustees didn't have an immediate warm response, not because of Janine, but because of the optics of that. I have to say, honestly, could not have been a better choice. It was able to really understand faculty, have credibility with faculty, and what I really like, too, in very difficult discussions today, if there's an argument about money, Janine will be able to, she does occasionally say, she doesn't pull this trump card very often, but she'll say, look, there's only one person at this table who knows what it's like to be laid off, and it's me. And so I'm not going to let you have more than what we can afford today. And that's hugely credible. So not only positive energy that came from those kind of choices with people like Janine, but also skills and credibility. And what I was looking for is, do you have the optimism about the university, and most importantly, do you care about the students first? Is that your primary focus? And if it is, I want you on the team.
So you've got your team, and now you need to put your strategic plan together. What are some of the things that, or from a research perspective, that you sought, that you went after?
Well, I will tell you that where I got the strategic plan actually was not from a consultant. It was not from our survey of our faculty, or even a survey from our students. It was a survey of the students who rejected us. Right? Now, this is tough stuff, right? This is like asking your spouse, like, how can I be a better husband? It's not always easy to read.
Yeah.
You know, so when I looked at this, three things came up really clearly. These are students who either left the university not happy and let us know that they weren't happy, or that they decided to go to another college instead of even coming to us. And so we read the surveys. I read these, and there are three things that came out really clearly, and we still use them today as our marker. Number one, I cannot feel like a number. I know you're a big university, but somebody has got to know me. They've got to like me, they've got to care about me, and they've got to guide my career. I have to be known by somebody. Secondly, I need you to be financially more competitive. Your competitors say they have a higher, price point, but the truth is they're discounting at enormous rates, right? So if you go to St. Joe's today and they say, well, we're worth $52,000, but we love Liz so much, we're going to give it to you for $14,000. And so our competitors are actually, we were deluded in thinking that we were price competitive. We weren't price competitive. So we've given $15 million, and this is within the budget, of scholarships to students very strategically, which has done two things. It's brought our enrollment for the 4 straight years in a row up, which is great. And we're announcing again this fall the 4th straight increase in enrollment. And it's also stabilized those students, because financial issues are often the reason why students leave the university, is because they're under financial stress. If we can reduce that for them, that's great. The third area that it's helped in is actually the quality of student we've been able to attract higher into the high school class, which is actually helpful in terms of their stability, because their confidence and skills are often better, and they can stay with us the whole 4 years incomplete. The last thing they said to us, which was really important, they said, I have to know the added value of my education. Mm-hmm. I can't just have excellence in the classroom. I also am going to the University of Southern Maine because you guys have small, medium, large-sized businesses, nonprofits, government agencies that I want to get into and get job experience so that I can get a job immediately. Most of our students, actually 52% of them, their parents didn't go to college. Right? So they don't have the luxury of going back to the parents and having things paid for a few years until they can figure things out. They have to have a job. And so they're saying, I want internships, I want clinicals, I want job experiences, I want to combine academic excellence with a real world experience of some sort that I can have on my resume. So those three things became the center of our strategic plan. We're getting to know students better. I can talk a little bit about that. We're adding much more money, and we're doing internships. Over 60% of our students have internships. Our plan is to try to get up to 100%. When I first came in, 39 of our 54 programs undergraduate programs had internships. Today, all 54 of them have internships. I want to thank the provost for helping make that happen. So we're pushing strongly to become a place that really helps integrate to the community, to the business community particularly.
So I think that's a really good lesson, as we like to share lessons at Like a Boss, that you got a tremendous insight from your detractors, right? Or the people that right. rejected USM. So understanding why people don't select your product or service is really important, because that was the guidepost for the strategic plan.
Somebody said to me, in a business or an organization, sometimes your biggest critics are your biggest fans, right? Mm-hmm. So the customer that just leaves your restaurant and doesn't say anything and will never come back, that's not good news, and they don't care about you, right? But the customer says, by the way, Glenn, nobody greeted me at the door. Your service was really slow, and the quality of your muffins are terrible.
Yeah.
Just the opposite of coffee by design, by the way.
Well done.
So I think that's been very helpful for me to realize that if somebody's taking the time to give me negative feedback, it's because they want us to be really good.
Right.
Right? I mean, in most cases. Sometimes they're just not happy people.
Yeah.
But in most cases, they want you to be excellent. So.
And so there have been some follow-up research that you've done over this time period with graduating seniors, right? That's a benchmark that you've been tracking?
Yeah, we have some really good news. It was very discouraging. The year that I came in, I just came in a month after graduation. So every year we survey our seniors, and we ask them a series of questions. One question that we ask them is, would you recommend this university to others? And we've done that for years, and we've been able to track it. In that 2013-14, because of all the turmoil and difficulty, I'm somewhat embarrassed to say that only 62% of our seniors who are graduating, so these aren't even people who left the university, these are people who actually survived the university, I guess, in their minds, that would say that they would recommend it. So over a third, or just over a third, said that they would not recommend it. That was pretty harsh feedback. We did the survey this May, and I had to read it 3 times. I think the provost and I sent it to each other saying, are we reading this? Our institutional research showed that the undergraduates who filled out that form at graduation to this last May, a few months ago, 94% would recommend the university. That's in a 3-year period. So
wow,
I was just heartbroken.
And I think you told me that your goal was in 5 years to get to 80%. So even if you slipped now 14%,
Yeah, right,
you still will have achieved your
We'll
goal.
manage to blow that, so
Yeah,
it's no problem.
No, but that's really, really impressive. So let's talk about USM as an employer, because you have many different employee sets, from faculty to administration. How big is it? And also, I know you also have a represented workforce, which is not something we've talked much about on the Legaboss stage. So go on that.
Well, thank you. We have 1,400 employees. We have about 260 plus full-time faculty, several hundred part-time faculty, people like formerly myself who went in and taught in the economics department for 20 years, teaching 1 or 2 courses a semester just as a supplement to my income kind of thing, and we have lots of people to do that. And then, of course, we have an incredible group of staff members who do everything from advising, admissions, public relations, support systems for our students, tutoring, those kind of things that support our students are extremely important in student life. So, I guess I'd first of all say that when you have a unionized staff, we deal with 5 different unions. So a couple of things that are very, very helpful for me, especially with the faculty union. The faculty is a little bit different perhaps than some of you who run corporations, in the sense that the faculty actually have a shared governance model, meaning that they actually have lots of rights in the determination of the future of the university, particularly around issues of curriculum and assessment and educational outcomes. They are the experts. So it's similar to maybe running a hospital in the sense that the doctors get to decide how the patients are treated in some way, but hospital administrators have to make sure that the budgets are balanced and support them appropriately, but guide them appropriately. So it's a little bit complicated, I think, in that sense. One of the things that has been very helpful is that I meet every Thursday morning with the faculty the faculty union representatives. Basically try to solve problems before they get into a place where we need to hire Bernstein Shore, although Pat's very good, but it has been helpful, I think. It has definitely, we can't resolve every issue, but we can probably resolve half or more of those issues just by communicating, trying to nip something in the bud, trying to make sure that there's communication on those key conflicts that are often between administration and the faculty. And so communication is a big thing. I will say, in favor of having a unionized workforce, the procedures for how you deal with things are very prescribed, and that can be a relief sometimes.
Sure.
And that process can be something that you can use to your advantage, in the sense of trying to slow down conflict a little bit before it gets out of control very quickly. So there are advantages. I will say my broad philosophy, you forgive me, there's a little bit of story there, but my broad philosophy of management actually comes from Joshua Chamberlain, which is kind of strange, but what he did, I don't know, historically I didn't even know this until the last few years, but just about 72 hours before the Battle of Little Round Top, he was presented 28 Mainers who were determined to be, quote, deserters. They had disagreements about when they were leaving the Union Army, and they were basically just said, heck with this, I'm heading back to Bethel or whatever, and they started leaving Pennsylvania and just started heading back, which in the Army is not is frowned upon, right? And but Mainers are independent, and so these 28 were rounded up, and they were brought to Chamberlain because they were like, yes, Chamberlain guy is well respected, with the 20th Maine, and we'll bring him to the. So they brought 28, and he said, well, what do you want me to do with them? And they said, well, they're deserters. You could shoot them if you wanted to. And he said, well, Maine's a pretty small state, and I'd like to run for governor someday, so I'm not going to do that. So he has this conversation with these 28 men, and he said, tell me what your side of it is. And they talked to him for a while, and he goes back to his tent, and he's there in the tent for a couple hours. In the meantime, he made sure that they were fed. And he comes back, and he says two things that I think are just the best leadership things I could ever say. He said, look, I don't know who's right, but if you're right, I will defend you all the way to Abraham Lincoln. I will do right by you, and I promise to do right by you. But right now, I need you. We're about to have the biggest battle of the war, and I don't know if I can hold this hill. And I've got thin numbers, and I need you. And all but two of them decided to step forward and fight that battle. Now, if you know the history of Gettysburg, and particularly the Battle of Little Round Top, they barely won. The 20th Maine barely overcame the 1st Alabama, and it was another Southern Division too, that they almost lost that battle. The whole history of America would have been different if they had been outflanked at that moment. So anytime that I talk about what's your leadership philosophy, it's those two things. I will try to do right by you, and by that means I never have anybody complain that they get too much money, by the way. But I will try to treat you well, and secondly, I need you. Right? And I think those are the two best things that a leader can say, and if they're sincere about both of those, I have found people will do anything for you. They will produce, and they want to be part of your team. And so I think that's sort of my larger management philosophy, yeah. and I think we're seeing it at USM where, sometimes I have to have closed door conversations, and I'll say, I've done right by you, I need more from you.
Yeah.
Right? And there are times when I say, I've done right for you, and you have done more than I could ever reasonably pay back. So.
That's wonderful. And with roots right in Maine, your leadership principles, I really respect that. I'm sure every employer in the room is struggling with workforce, from finding people to finding people with the right skill set. And you talked about how USM has put clinical experiences together, internships together. What do you think the most important skills are that you're teaching students that are going to be helpful in the workforce Sure. as they graduate? Well,
so we have the data on this from you, from the corporate world, and you've been really clear about what you'd like. So sometimes in higher ed and maybe in the world, we get caught up in this liberal arts versus STEM-related technical skills, et cetera. My answer is you've got to have both, really. And the world that we're in today, it's not good enough just to have a series of soft skills. You also have to add into that some level of technical expertise, but it doesn't have to be intense. What businesses are, every 10 years, the Department of Labor does a scan of what businesses want from higher education and high school graduates and college graduates, and they're very clear. I need people who can collaborate with each other, particularly people who are diverse, that can talk to each other in diverse elements. I need people who can problem solve complex problems. I need people who can communicate in a variety of ways really well. Those are number 2, 3, and 4. Number 1 is not often talked about. The number 1 thing that businesses want is what's called by psychologists as executive function. That is the ability to take a task, break it down, and get it done without constantly bugging your boss, right? It's like, is Lisa the kind of, woman who's going to be able to come in, and if Glenn says, here's kind of what we're thinking about, here's the project, here's the hill to climb, She doesn't need to come bug me all the time. She's got a pretty good idea how to break that down, who she needs to talk to, how much money it's going to cost, what kind of resources and information she's need, what kind of political support she needs, and what kind of execution and technical skills does she need. That is the most desired thing, is that sort of executive, self-initiative, self-determined, really excited individual who says, I'll make that happen. And businesses are really clear. So we're trying to develop opportunities for students to be able to do that. I will say that I hear a lot about, and this is where, and again, this, please don't misunderstand this as any critique of the community college system. I think that the community college system is doing wonderful things. I work there. I think I'm a big fan. But where we've seen in America significant transitions in prosperity, places like Raleigh, places like Charlotte, Austin, Seattle, Silicon Valley, is high densities of BAs, very high densities of BAs, which is why I'm a big fan of the university education, in the sense that they can take the technical skills, and you're looking for people who can see around corners what's going to happen next. They're seeing opportunities for connections. They're seeing synchronicities. They're seeing global patterns and trends that they can become part of. And they're basically able to see beyond the technical day-to-day and really put that in. I think Maine is struggling a little bit with that, and this is why I think we need to have more and more people out there that are thinking in that at BA and above level about possibilities, potential, and opportunities. So I feel like we have a very, very important role in that.
For sure, for sure. So we're going to go to questions in a couple minutes. There's a microphone right in the middle, so if you have a question, you can start to queue up there. Let's talk about the name change. I can't believe we didn't get to that yet. So people get so emotional about name changes. Did you want us to take a poll here? Would that be helpful?
No.
So talk about the process behind it and what kind of feedback you've received so far.
Thanks. That is a good question. So I think many of you know, really, this is really kind of a business problem. It's not a philosophical problem. The business problem is that we don't have 18-year-olds sufficient to fill all 7 public universities in Maine, right? So it's a significant issue, and what's been happening is that trend line has been going down for really several decades in most of Maine. Now it's actually hitting the greater Portland area, right? So places like Scarborough or South Portland and Falmouth, Yarmouth have traditionally in the 90s and the early 2000s seen significant demographic growth. Now all of those schools are leveling off in growth, right? So this is a very scary, if you're a college president, this is not good news, right? 18-year-olds are dropping dramatically. We're going to have to balance our portfolio with strong interest from out of state. And what we know, Forbes magazine just rated Portland as, again, one of the top 10 best small cities in America. Obviously, other magazines have commented about our food in a very positive way and things like that. We know that we believe that Portland is a draw. And we really feel like we're hiding our light under a rock a little bit by the University of Southern Maine. I went to a conference with chancellors and presidents in March. These are all public school chancellors or presidents from the SUNY system in New England and in northern New England. And literally 3 of them said, where is the University of Southern Maine anyway? Right? And here you are. And then when I said it's basically, our headquarters are basically in Portland, Maine, we have a campus in Gorham, Maine, 2 out of the 3 said, that's a great city. That's an amazing city. And so what we're looking at is something along the lines of University of Maine, Portland, that will draw people from New England and Boston and Hartford and Providence markets that will come here. Now, the good news about that is that 70%, there's a 70-70 rule in higher education. 70% of your graduates will stay within 70 miles of where they graduate, right? Not true for the super elite schools, right? So the Middlebury's, Williams, the Bowdens, that's not necessarily true. But for the vast majority of higher education, where you get your degree is often where you stay, right? So for us, bringing those students into Portland, educating them here, we have a good likelihood of being able to keep them here, which is good news for you as business owners. It's good news for really the greater Portland area and for Maine in general. So it is a challenge. I would say that I found out after talking to a couple of college presidents who went through name changes that about 2/3 of your alumni will immediately say no. We're no different. And I think the good news about the no, though, I will say that when I get these emails, what they actually are saying, which I appreciate, is they're saying, you're in a really good position. You're starting to really take off. Your numbers are good. People are really respecting you. Why do you want to change that? Why do you want to mess that up, right? Now, we're Mainers. Like, change doesn't come easily. And if things look like they're doing okay, don't mess it up is a good, logical answer. I just can't see the next 3 to 5 years being healthy for the university unless we are stronger out of state, to be honest. I think we can muddle through, but I can't continue the enrollment growth because we're now at a place where we've basically started to cannibalize from other universities. So literally on her way out, Kate Foster was the head of UMaine Farmington, and she said to me, I could see over the last 3 years that as you got your act together more and more at USM, that I lost 30 students the first year, 40 students the next, and over 50 the next. So basically what we're doing is we're eating each other's seed corn, and that's not a survivable business model. So I've got to think differently. I'm kind of paid to think differently. I don't like irritating our alumni, but I have to say, I think we owe it to ourselves to have a larger conversation. So we're doing some polling in those markets outside in New England and New York to see if it would make a difference. And if it doesn't, we won't make it. It's expensive to do a name change, so we won't do it. But if that moves the needle, I need to keep pushing that rock uphill. Oh, yeah, right.
Well, I guess.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
I guess we didn't have to poll. You've got the answer there. All right. So a couple of classic like a boss questions. What keeps you up at night?
The demographic challenges are definitely a challenge. Managing the budget, I have to say, I sat last night with the former president of Colby and had dinner with him. And I don't think he ever, he did amazing things up there. I don't think he ever woke up and said, can I balance the budget today? When you got $1 billion endowment for 1,300 or 1,500 kids, you're okay. And I think that, honestly, just like you as in business, you just have to constantly look at those numbers. But what also keeps me up at night is like, oh my God, what I'm doing in part of is really much bigger than me, and I'm excited about doing that. And that keeps me up in a positive way, actually.
That's great. That's wow. Describe your Maine. How do you decompress after a day at the university?
Well, I get up and run every morning about 5:30. I do about 5 or 6 miles. Increasingly slow as I get older, but I do that. I do a little bit of biking, do some kayaking, and in general, just try to read and take naps on Sunday afternoons. So
after you read the paper.
After I read the Portland Press Herald.
The Maine Sunday Telegram.
Maine Sunday Telegram.
Or the Lewiston Sun Journal, or any, they're all great.
Right.
Yeah. And I want to give you a chance to talk about the Promise Scholarship. I know you had an event around that last night, and a lot of members of the business community are really behind what you're doing there.
Thank you. So we have something I'll just briefly say that I'm extremely proud of last night, and thank you. A number of people from our foundation came last night to an event around something we call the Promise Scholars. We are working with over 30 youth-serving organizations around the state of Maine. These are boys and girls clubs, YMCA's, kind of college step-up programs, trio programs, summer camps, Susan Curtis and other summer camps, to basically identify those individuals in Maine, those youth, who are exceptionally talented and have high potential, but almost no income and often have very fragile home lives. And so we have our first inaugural class of 19 Promise Scholars. Those scholars now, thanks to the help of we've now raised almost $7 million out of our $15 million that we want to raise. And we were able to do our first 19, and they basically get almost completely free college education to come to USM. And I don't see them as a high needs, high risk. I see them as truly Maine's unique leaders whose powerful stories of perseverance are the things that are going to make them exceptional. And so we have a special advising system for them, special financing system for them, and we're working, and these are students that we might not normally see in the way that we see them unless these youth serving organizations said, this kid from JMG or this kid from the Waterville Boys and Girls Club is outstanding. They are worth this scholarship. So we hope to expand that to the 15 million and have 100 of these students coming through every year and stay with us all 4 years to complete. So we're really proud of that.
Thank you. I think we are ready to roll for questions. Who has a question for President Cummings? Oh, Arthur, do you want to? Could you go to the mic, please?
So I have a huge amount of respect for the core value of the university, which you've articulated a number of times eloquently, that it's a place for the free exchange of ideas, respectfully and politely. And if there's speech I don't like, the remedy is not censorship, it's more speech. But now there's a newcomer on the stage that says that derision is okay, scorn is okay, the truth doesn't matter, lying is fine. How does the university react to that? What does your moral compass do as this comes on, and it's not just another opinion, it's another way of being present? How do you respond?
Yeah, those are really difficult questions. I should probably add that to the keep me up at night. I think that what we've seen, especially after Charlottesburg, is a disturbing trend. So traditionally in American university, we've tried, not always successfully, to have a series of difficult conversations that the university is the right place to have it, and disagreement is supposed to be respected. What we're seeing on really both sides of the political spectrum right now, on some level, that we have college students shutting down things that they don't like to hear. I respect some of their positions, but not their style. And in the same mode, we're seeing now positions that I think are intellectually indefensible, which is the supremacy of one race or one gender over another, one religion over another. And so we are starting to see these vast conflicts that are coming to universities on a regular basis. So my fear is, oh my God, please don't come to my university and say horrible things. But that's going to be the nature of where we are. And I think that the university has the right to determine the type of interaction that goes on. It does not have the right to censor free speech, and that's just a core American value. However, our lawyers tell us that we can determine the forum, the setting, the balance that gets appropriated. So we can do things like say, yeah, you can have your position, but you're going to debate somebody on the other side, right? Or we can say, this is a position that we personally don't agree with, and we're going to say that, but it's something that you can articulate. And we've had to be very firm about, not shouting each other down and allowing that communication, even if we disagree with that speech, because America has proven time and time again the suppression of free speech has turned out to have larger long-term consequences for the democracy than not doing so. So we've leaned on that side. Keeping it civil isn't always easy. We've had to have people removed from some events because people are so heated, I'm sorry to say, but it's only because we need to have that exchange and we need to maintain that exchange. No easy answers, I have to say, but that's kind of where we are.
Chandra?
Good morning. Thank you very much for this great event. You grew up in Maine, did international things, came back to Maine. Why did you leave Maine for college, and what are you doing to keep people like you in the state or to go to school here?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I actually originally went to the University of Maine at Farmington, and then I decided I wanted to be a lawyer, and I got a scholarship out to Ohio. So I tried to stay in Maine. But I will say this: our plan for keeping people in Maine is also to make sure that they get international experience. So all of our honor students now, the reason I think this is very, very important is I do think it helps tremendously to get our students out of their normal context into a different context. So We have a North Atlantic initiative. One of the major reasons for that North Atlantic initiative in our relationship with Iceland, for example, is to try to get our honor students to spend at least 10 days studying something in Iceland. It's relatively cheap, and they also, our partnership with Reykjavik University has allowed us some free housing and some opportunities that reduce the cost for our students. Very expensive sometimes for students to take a year abroad or to take an entire summer abroad for our students. So we're trying to get all our honor students to have that experience so they can bring that back to Maine and bring those ideas back to Maine, but keep them in the university as part of that process. And I think just focusing on, the vitality of the Portland area and how we expand that to all of Maine is really important. What I'd like to do someday is to have a rural return scholarship. So students who come to us from Dover-Foxcroft, for example, or from Bingham or from Fort Fairfield, would actually have reductions in their student loans, significant reductions of student loans, to return at least for a couple of years and try to start businesses or add value to the employment base in those rural communities, so that we're not playing a Hunger Games thing where everybody's converging on Portland and nobody's going back out into the rural areas of Maine. So we haven't done that yet, but my dream would be someday to create a rural scholarship. Maybe the next governor will help do that. So.
Great.
Thanks.
Hi, Glenn. Barbara Raps.
Hey, Barbara.
I did my MBA at USM, and I had a wonderful experience. The other students that were in my classes were brilliant. It was a very dynamic program. The professors were wonderful. It was about 10, 12 years ago now. The infrastructure and the facilities were really lacking. And I know the university has done a lot, made a lot of improvements. There have been some wonderful donations, so some new buildings added since then. I wanted to hear a little bit about your vision for the infrastructure at University of Southern Maine, and what people can do to help with that.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually a question and something that didn't get discussed before. I want to say there's a very exciting, we just completed our master plan, just completed in the last month or two. I want to say that there is a very exciting opportunity for us to move forward on a number of fronts. One, just going back, Barbara was in an MBA program. Now we're looking at bringing our law program, MBA, and policy programs under one roof, and the Alfond Foundation is considering this tremendously. They've been involved for several years now in helping us move towards what's called the Graduate Center for Professional Studies. What we know, some of you who are attorneys, some of you are in healthcare, whatever, we know that law, policy, and business all seem to integrate in your real world workforce. And so we're trying to pull that together as a single entity under one roof, and the Alfonds want to build us a new building. Some of you may know that Architectural Digest diagnosed our law school as the 8th ugliest building in higher education. We're very proud of that brutalism. So the timing would be perfect for that. I also want to say, and if it's appropriate, if I could I tell you how to vote, but I really would encourage or ask for your support on November 6th. There is question 4, and that would allow us a major workforce expansion in engineering, healthcare, particularly nurses, and IT. It would also help us build a major new career center on the Portland campus, and with that, we would, through private sources, not through the bond, we would build a we'd build a residential hall that would allow us 400, 500, 600 students on campus for the first time, creating a real community in the Portland campus. That would take away that ugly parking lot as you come up through Bedford Street, turn it into a green space, create a new student center, and create the dorms that would actually be looking over the back cove. So we believe that that would help attract, those would be upperclassmen. We don't want to hurt the Gorham campus. We'd keep that, make sure we stabilize the Gorham campus, and then really create a really attractive Portland city campus right here in the heart of Portland that people could stay overnight. It would have graduate students, law students, and upperclassmen in those dorms. So I think if that bond passes, all of those begin to roll. We also have talked about a Center for the Arts there. That's probably a 3 to 5 year project. But we want to create a campus where people can walk through, bring their kids, feel connected, feel like it's a true community asset, not just a university asset.
We have time for one more question. Is there one more? There we go.
Good morning, Glenn. Thank you. I've really enjoyed the presentation. So I am a small business owner in Portland. And I'm just wondering, how does your plans for the future of the university, how do they include connecting students, you talked about internships, with smaller businesses, because more than half of the employment comes from businesses with less than 50 employees, micro businesses and things like that.
Yep.
So it's like the small business and the startup community is what I'm interested in hearing more about.
Yeah, thank you. And that is often overlooked because we build these relationships with WEX or Martins Point and some of the bigger employers. But what you're absolutely right. Huge percentages of the Maine workforce are actually working for smaller, 15 employees or fewer. So we, for the first time, about 3 years ago, I was at an Eggs and Issues. I always tell this story, and there's about 15 minutes of sort of coffee drinking time and people socializing, and in that, I was there for about 11 minutes before the lights flashed and we had to go in, and I got 4 business cards from business owners saying, "I need your students." And I said, "Oh, wow." And I got back to my table and I realized, this is 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I didn't have anybody in the university to give those 4 cards to. Like, I didn't know who to say, do something with this. And so we created a vice president of corporate engagement position. And I'm proud to say that Jean Parquette, the former labor commissioner, has joined us, and she will be taking that position. And she has deep knowledge of all levels of business, from small, medium, large, as well as a bunch of nonprofits, government agencies. So her goal is going to be able to take it even deeper to make sure that we are hitting on every cylinder, all levels of internships. Because as I say, we've got 40% more of our students that we've got to get into internships. So we can't do it without small business. I think Jean, who's with us today, maybe will put you two together before you leave to make sure that that's happening.
Well, thank you, Glenn. Congratulations on all the success that you've had at USM.
Thank you.
In such a short period of time, and your success will benefit all of us here in the greater Portland area, and so many great leadership lessons. So I hope people took notes. I'm going to go read more about Joshua Chamberlain because that was really impactful, and maybe pick up the Red Badge of Courage.
Oh,
but
there you go. Yes.
I think really one of my big takeaways is what a great reader you are, and just the importance of that throughout your life to keep up on that. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you to our sponsors. Our next event will be with President and CEO of Dead River Company, Deanna Sherman, joins us. I think that's in November and October. What? October 26th. So is that the right date, Deanna? Okay, well, we hope it is. Also, many of you will get an exit survey, and we're starting to do our 2019 Like a Boss lineup. So if there's anyone you'd like to see in that red chair, make sure you include that in your survey. And again, thank you. Happy Friday to everyone.
Thank you so much. That was really